Sandra Hicken, and I'm the Quality Conversations Programme Lead, and I'm just about to share with you our slides. I'd got them ready in the other room, but I'm just, bear with me. And I'm going to also introduce Jo Hall, Dr. Jo Hall, who's a clinical psychologist who works across DCHS and Derbyshire County Council, and we're both going to be talking to you today about quality conversation. So I'm hoping if we give it a moment, you should be able to see the slides fairly soon. I'll get Jo to give me a thumbs up when it appears.
They're quite small at the moment, Sandra, but they're there.
Okay, I can't see them yet. So I'm going to try again. If not, it's not a problem. I can do it the old-fashioned way.
I can see them on my screen.
Okay, that's great. But if I can't forward them on, Lee, then I can see them now. I'm hoping that you can. Yeah.
Yep.
Brilliant. Okay, so Jo and I today are here to talk to you about the Quality Conversation programme, and in the spirit of good communication, we hope that this will give us an opportunity to have a conversation with you and listen to your views about how we can improve our programme, look for opportunities to work together to improve the communication that we have with our staff across all of Derbyshire health, social care and voluntary sectors. So what we're going to do today is spend a little bit of time telling you about the programme and why it started, and then we're hoping that we'll have time at the end to have an opportunity to listen to you and your views. First of all, I'm going to tell you specifically about the programme. Then we're going to explain to you why we think it's really important to include information about how inequalities in health affect people unfairly and the effect that that can have on people's health and well-being. We're going to give you some examples of how the training that we've provided has had direct impact on some individual service users and patients. We're going to go on then to give you a little bit more detail about the programme, about what's actually in it. And then we're hoping at the end that we're going to have a conversation with you about your views about communication with health and social care and community-based staff, voluntary agencies. We hope that we'll be able to do that using the chat function and by using the hand raise function, which I hope that you are all feeling comfortable with. Because there's so many people on the call and we want to try to give everybody an opportunity to participate and give us their views and opinions, it'd be really good if you are able to. I've lost my screen. It's back again. It's really so we want to give everybody an opportunity to give you our view, for you to give us your views, so that we just want to sort of be considerate that we might have to move on from one topic to another topic so that we give an opportunity to cover a wide range of topics. We think that each and every one of you have got valid personal experience and we really value and want to hear about that, and it might be that we'd be able to take an opportunity to follow some conversations up at a later time if there's not always time to get to the bottom of things. So I hope that you'll give me permission to be able to say, can we move on to the next question, if that's needed. So I hope that that's all right with you. So We have the Quality Conversations programme, which has been running in the format that it is now for the last 18 months. It's communication skills training, and it's for anybody who works in a patient, client or service user role across the whole of Derbyshire. And it's really unusual in that it's training lots of people from different organisations and different roles at the same time together. That also gives them a chance to learn from one another and have insight into the experiences of other services, and then that gives them a greater breadth and depth of their knowledge of other services that they might be able to use to support their patients, service users and clients. The training that we provide is based in evidence about what makes effective conversations. So there's lots of research into understanding the nature of communication, how to engage with people, how to listen properly and to gain some perspective into their understanding. I think it's something that we often take for granted, that we all know how to communicate, and we don't always get it right. So it's really useful to take a step back and look at how we communicate with people in order to improve our skills. It's also really important that we teach staff. It's not just about what we say. Body language is a really major contribution to understanding. So there's been research by Albert Morabian that he maintains that when you're having conversations, it's actually only 7% of what's communicated is via what's said, but that 38% is via your tone of voice, and the majority of communication is via body language. Whatever percentages you give to those kind of general fields, generally speaking, what's said isn't as important in terms of how it's said and taking the body language and visual cues at the same time. So as I said, it's really easy to assume that we do it well, but it's really is important to give people a chance to stop and think about the conversations they've had and reflect on what could be better, as well as learn new techniques to apply to the conversations that we all have. It's also really important for our staff and volunteers to understand the impact that income or education, housing or employment can have a direct but unfair effect on our health and well-being, and Jo is going to discuss this further a little bit later. I'm sorry, we've got quite a lot of background noise going on at the moment, so if anybody could mute their mics, that would be really helpful. Thank you. What's really important in quality conversations is that we focus on the person that's in front of us, and that we see them as the expert in the situation that they're dealing with. It's really important that we see them in what we call a strengths-based approach. So see all the skills and life experiences that people bring to their healthcare, and it's important for us to know what's worked for them and what's not worked in the past. And it's really basically all about what matters to the individual you're talking to, not what's the matter with them. So I'm going to hand over to Jo now, and she's going to carry on talking to you, and I'll just carry on with the slides.
So on this slide, I really wanted to talk about why we believe that this programme is really so important for staff and volunteers working in Derbyshire. And one of the reasons is the programme has right at its base or its foundation this idea that health in Derbyshire is unfair at the moment, and that's the same across the country. And it's really important that when people are having conversations and communicating with each other, that there's an awareness that that is the reality. So there's lots of examples of just how unfair health is for people in Derbyshire and, you know, across the country. One figure that I find really shocking is that there is an 11-year difference in life expectancy, so how long someone is expected to live from one side of Amber Valley to the other. Everything we're seeing in the research suggests that the pandemic may have even made this gap a bit bigger. And put in kind of people terms, that means that in one side of Amber Valley, people don't necessarily, grandparents may not live to see their grandchildren grow up. And that's, you know, that's not okay. So from our perspective, this programme bases conversation and communication skills in that idea that we need to really recognise that patients, citizens, clients don't have the same opportunities for health, and that actually the way we communicate can take account of that and try and, rather than make that gap end up getting bigger, trying to kind of reduce it and have an awareness that for someone that is maybe juggling 3 jobs, a bit more of a conversation about how they can look after their health or how appointments might work for them could really, really be helpful. We go to the next slide, please, Sandra. So as Sandra has also touched upon, another reason that we think this programme is really, really important is that it places you as the experts in your life and in what matters to you, which seems common sense, but as you're aware, kind of traditional models sometimes set that kind of idea that the healthcare professional is the kind of the expert. And yes, they have the expertise in maybe medicines or things such as that. We know that actually, you know, patients, citizens bring so much. We are the experts and you are the experts in your life experiences, what that means for you, how that impacts your health. And actually this conversation programme, Quality Conversations, is training up staff to really kind of meaningfully take that into account in the conversations. So it starts with the expertise, the experience, the learning you can bring. And I think in terms of behaviour change, what we know is that we're much more likely to make changes when we think that they are, you know, changes that matter to us, when we have come up with those reasons ourselves, rather than when a doctor maybe says, I think it would be good for you if you did this, or you really ought to do that. All of us generally will kind of push back against that because it feels like somebody else is kind of telling us what to do and thinks they know better than us. So we know that that's not often that helpful. And in this programme, that's kind of one of the many kind of foundational kind of ideas. Can we go to the next slide, please? So there are lots of examples across Derbyshire of the difference the programme has made to the way that staff communicate with citizens. This one is, I've kept it really, really general, so it's not, you know, not at all identifiable, but it's a really common scenario I hear from staff that have had training in quality conversations. So it's based on kind of a local lifestyle service where people will ring up and maybe ask because they've been referred for stop smoking support or maybe weight management support. In this case, stop smoking support. And when they rung up, the person on the end of the phone, a member of staff, could just hear that that person sounded quite stressed. And rather than just trying to book them straight into stop smoking or whatever service it might be, they actually asked that question, you know, an open question, kind of, you know, what are your thoughts about stopping smoking? And then pausing. And actually what became clear was that actually the client's priority wasn't to stop smoking, but their doctor felt that that would be good for them. The staff member that kind of told me this scenario then mentioned, well, I then kind of asked a question along the lines of kind of, well, what, you know, what's important to you? And actually what the client then said was they were feeling quite stressed due to finances, and that was impacting on their health. And I've heard this line, although one client said this line, I've heard this line numerous times. This client said, "Thank you. You are the first person that's ever actually listened to me like that properly." And what they did, that staff member, rather than just booking somebody into a service that they've been referred to, they took the time to have a conversation where they actually listened to what really mattered to that individual in that moment and listened. Not listen because they wanted to tick a box, not listen because they thought they ought to, but actually listening to try and get it right for that individual on that phone conversation. And that is really, really powerful, because actually for those people, and some of you would have experienced that, being truly listened to isn't as common as it should be. And when it happens, we often really know it's happened. So in that scenario, the client was signposted for support onwards. And we know that without that quality conversation, it is really, really likely that they may have actually dropped out of service, because actually they may have felt, yet again, I've not been listened to and I've been let down. So I'll pass you over to Sandra for the next slide.
You're on mute, Sandra.
I've just realised it's just flashed at me. Sorry, thank you. Right, so the next example is a good example that a member of staff who'd gone through the quality conversation programme reported back to me. A patient had had an acute stroke, and that meant that he'd got weakness in his arm and his leg. He had a significant hearing impairment, but he lived alone independently and had support from his daughter and his friends. Now, the member of staff who'd completed the programme, they were really aware that they had to understand what mattered to Mr. A, and that they were very aware that they might make assumptions about both what he needed, but also about how they might go about communicating with him. So they met with Mr. A, and they allowed time in the very start of their interactions with him to work out the best ways to communicate together, to look at the strategies that he used before and the people around him that he felt comfortable to include in that communication. And that meant that they worked together to set his goals, and they worked together to help him decide on what his rehab plan was going to be, rather than just what can be sometimes feel like just being told that these are the next stages in terms of your rehab programme. And the member of staff I spoke to said that if they hadn't have gone to the quality conversations training, they'd have started out in the relationship with that gentleman quite differently, and they might have got to where they needed to be in the end, but it wouldn't have been as smooth, and his experience wouldn't have been as good from the start. And they felt that they reduced the experience and impact of that slow start to understanding together about how they might communicate. So they felt that the programme for them had made a really big difference to both them and to the patient. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the programme. It's a virtual training programme, and the sessions are for 3 hours over Teams like this, and they run 4 weeks apart. The reason for that is it gives people an opportunity to stop, think and reflect on the things they've learnt in the first session, and an opportunity to practice some of those techniques, so they can come back into the second session and do some reflective learning together as a group. Originally, the programme was due to be a day and a half face-to-face, so that would be a first day of training, then going away and practicing and reflecting on what you've learnt, and then coming back for a half day for some more training and a reflection. But we were due to start in April 2020, and for obvious reasons it didn't start straight away, and we had to turn it into a virtual offer. We still have lots of opportunities for people to practice techniques, talking to one another and listening to one another in breakout rooms. So it gives some groups of staff a small space to practice and listen to one another. We found that providing the training this way has probably had some positive impacts. Training is never as good, I think, in a virtual setting, generally speaking. Face-to-face is always more preferable. But I do think that there are probably more people who've been released to come on the training, because it's easier to release somebody to come for 3 hours training and then they can go back into their workplace than it would be to release somebody to go for a day and a half's face-to-face training. And the benefit of doing it virtually means we have had truly mixed groups. If you do things in a geographical way, you tend to find people who work around that geographical room will all go to the training and already know each other. So I think we've had an opportunity to have more networking between staff. There's a workbook that staff can use for reference. So the online learning that they do is reinforced in the workbook. So the sorts of things that are covered in the programme is listening skills, the energy to conversations, so how we can walk hand in hand with somebody through their conversation rather than them feeling that they're being told what to do. Techniques how to actively listen, listen in a compassionate way. We go over strategies to help people with goal setting and health coaching in general. We get people to practice active listening skills, and we also get people to think about the biases that they might bring to situations when they're listening and engaging with somebody, and how to recognise that and deal with it. It's really good to give an opportunity for staff to share their experiences and share their good communication experiences. So there's been a lot of kind of mutual learning as well as learning that's been given directly from the facilitators. We also support staff by, we've got a network of peer coaches or champions. These are staff members who really get that an improvement in our ability to communicate effectively with our patients and service users, their families and their carers, as well as with each other, has a really direct impact on the care that we provide. And so they champion and support quality conversations in their local areas. So as part of the peer coach network, we provide those members of staff with additional training so that they can then roll that out into their local areas. And we also provide quality conversations in action, which are small meetings. So if a whole team is taking on the approach, they have an opportunity as a team to talk together about how they can improve their communication skills and engage with different groups of patients, staff and family members in a different and better way. Also part of the programme is we've got a fairly extensive website, and at the end of the slides, the website address will be on the slide, and I'll put it in the chat for you as well, so that you've got access to that. The website's public facing, so anybody can look at it. There is access to the slides and the workbook in there, and there's lots of information about health inequalities, the unfair differences that are in health. There are slides available for team-based learning, so just small chunks of learning that people can use in staff meetings. And there are lots of cartoons and videos because everybody learns in different ways, as well as more in-depth articles and resources. And then there are links to other forms of training and that people can take links to. And then what we're hoping to do in the future is to provide some e-learning which would give everybody that works within Derbyshire, within health, social care and the voluntary sector, to have a basic introduction to quality conversations. It would be accessible for people whenever it suited them, and it would form a foundation of learning. We would then create a tiered approach to learning. So we'd have the e-learning as a basic starting point. We'd have the 2-3 hour session quality conversations training as the next step. And then we're hoping to create masterclass training sessions for more in-depth learning, possibly aimed at teams that really need it. So that if you were needing to work on goal setting with specific groups of patients or service users, then we'd set up training about goal setting. But what the future really is about is about an opportunity for us to talk to you guys about what you think we need to include in the training. So we'd like this second half of this meeting to talk to you about what you are interested in making sure is in the training that we provide for our health and social care and voluntary staff in Derbyshire. So as I said before, we've got about 30 or 40 people in the call. So we're hoping that we've got a couple of questions that we're going to ask you. So we're interested in your views about, based on your experiences of conversations with health and social care and voluntary agency-based staff. So again, if you can be considerate of other people, so we'll try and get as many views as we can. If you feel that you've got more to say and I'm cutting you off, it's not that I'm cutting you off. I'm really interested in what you've got to say, but I want to try and get as many views as possible, and there'll be an opportunity for us to carry on the conversations outside of this meeting. So I think there've been a couple of questions in the chat already. So what we're going to ask you now for you to put into the chat is, when it comes to communication with professionals, what's important to you? And then I think, Jo, have you been keeping your eye on the chat? Are the things that we need to start responding to already? Barbara, I see you've asked, is this available for all staff or just patient-facing staff? So it started out as a clinically based training programme for clinicians, whatever a clinician is. We very quickly decided it was for anybody who deals with patients, but there have been many members of staff who've come on it who are not in a patient-facing role. Sometimes that's leaders or managers of a service, so that they've got an understanding of it before they send their members of staff on it. But I think it's really important to remember that receptionists and GP surgeries aren't clinicians, but they're dealing with patients every day. So there are lots of people who answer, who are often the interface, first interface that people have with health and social care services are not necessarily clinically based. So no, we've got a hand up.
Yeah.
I can't see who that is.
If I can just bring Jocelyn.
It's just the...
Hello, my name is Jocelyn Street. Something I'd like to see included in your training is, if a person has a long-term condition, a common problem is that when you go to see anyone in the health service, I don't know about social care, I've no experience there, but from doctors down to any healthcare assistant, they focus on your long-term condition. And quite often you may be trying to access the health service for something, you tend to know your long-term condition. So you don't need somebody reinventing the wheel, and you need someone to listen to what you're telling them about yourself and not relate everything back to that long-term condition. Most people who have long-term conditions have comorbidities anyway. But the one I give is, you know, I'm a type 1 diabetic. I can go in to see somebody with my arm hanging off and they'll tell me that my blood sugar level's high and what are we going to do about it? And it is incredibly frustrating, and it's quite a barrier to get past when you're dealing with people. So I would really like some training that says, hammers home the normal for me route and stops people trying to reinvent the wheel with the people they're talking to.
Jocelyn, that's a really excellent point, and that's where it's about what matters to you, not what's the matter with you.
Absolutely.
That we hammer home, as you say, significantly through the programme, and it is starting to get there. There are so many times when you will receive a referral from somebody, not necessarily just a doctor, where when you actually ask the individual what matters to them, it's something completely different. So there's a really good example of somebody who had been referred to a social prescriber for assistance with his substance abuse. And when she asked him what mattered to him, it was his finances and his housing. And he said, it was another good example of what Joe said, it was the first time anybody had ever listened to him. And she supported him with his housing and finance issues. And when those were resolved, he then participated in his substance support and stopped his alcohol use. But the label on that referral was referral to alcohol support. So it's about listening, and that's the key. That is the very starting point of quality conversations. And if people are nothing but that, we'll have done something. It's just about getting it across to enough people. That's the challenge.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question.
Sandra, we've got a couple of questions in the chat to cover. So Linda's asked, is there a cost involved?
No, Linda. The training is already paid for and available to anybody within the Derbyshire area that work in health, social care and the voluntary sector. So it's a fairly broad church, and we've had people who are employed, I'm not sure I should say this, but if you work with Derbyshire, people in Derbyshire, then you've got access to that training. That's what's important. So no, there's no cost. It's already been paid for via Joined Up Care Derbyshire and Health Education England.
And we've got a question from Anne. Are healthcare staff taught how to speak to patients during their training, e.g. medical students?
Ah, excellent. Gosh, I could have planted that question, Anne. Thank you. Really interestingly, Sheffield Hallam have heard what we're doing, Sheffield Hallam University, and they're incorporating the principles of quality conversations into their undergraduate and postgraduate training programme for everybody within health and social care. So they do already have a component of communication, and they're going to use the principles of quality conversations, and that will be built into, for instance, each year of the third 3-year programme. You talk about communication in increasing levels of complexity, and it will be included in the postgraduate programmes that they run as well. And on the basis of that, we'll be talking to Derby University. We also have students who come into Derbyshire, and when we have the opportunity, we're trying to support students by providing them with training about quality conversations, or giving the people who support the students some resources to use with the students. So excellent question, thank you.
Thank you. And Michael's put in the chat a really important point around I'm assuming linked to that question of what's important to you. Getting connected by telephone can be an issue with GP surgeries. So actually that connection point. Michael, if you did want to kind of add anything to that, feel free to join in the conversation.
It is frustrating though, Michael, isn't it? Because yeah, you do actually need to make a connection with a human in order to have communication and to get your point across. We do have quite a lot of really interested GPs and GP practices. In your roles where you can influence services, telling people about this training programme that's available would be really helpful. It's a great way to help us to spread the word even more. I do a lot of work trying to network with lots of people to tell them about the service. But sometimes, you know, the message doesn't get through. So as many different voices as we can have telling people about the programme, the better we'll be.
There's a message from Fiona, who works in behaviour change and is a motivational interviewing trainer. And it sounds like Fiona is really pleased to see some of the content that you've mentioned being rolled out. Are you capturing the change in practice via evaluation, qualitatively and quantitatively?
Yeah, brilliant. And Fiona, we can perhaps link up. That would be great to have an opportunity to work together. Yes, so we evaluate the programme in different ways. We look at the change in knowledge and confidence in using skills before somebody comes on the programme and then after each of the 2 sessions. We then ask them to complete a questionnaire 2 to 3 months after they've completed the programme's training to see again whether or not they've been in a position to use the skills that they've learnt. And then we have qualitative measurement. So we ask them about what difference it's made, what's been good about the training, what's been bad about the training, and we review that on a regular basis. And, you know, I could tell you how many people have been on, how many people from various organisations or various roles have come on. And then that helps me to target into the areas where I can see that we're not getting much traction. But the other thing, Fiona, is if you've got any ideas about how we might improve that evaluation, that would be really helpful.
And actually, I think, Sandra, that leads really nicely to a comment from Shelley around is this training optional? And as people who may benefit the most from this type of training may not necessarily recognise that they would benefit from it, which I think is a really well-timed question and really interesting question to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. It is optional, Shelley. I would really love to see it as being part of induction to all of the organisations within Derbyshire. And then it would be not mandatory. I don't think we could make it mandatory, but it would certainly be an ask that we'd ask all organisations. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing the e-learning, because then that would be something that I would hope that organisations would be able to say to staff from a whole range of different departments to say, we expect you to do this within the first 3 months or 6 months of your employment within this organisation. You're right. Often people who would really benefit from the training don't recognise that they need to. It's a bit like we all assume we're good communicators. We don't. The people who perhaps aren't as reflective might not pick up the cues that their communication skills aren't quite so good. Interestingly, going back to Fiona's point about evaluation, we are going to be taking part in a research programme with Imperial College London, and that is looking at patient and service user and client feedback to the health and social care and voluntary staff about whether or not they felt listened to, about whether they feel that they have worked together to set their aims, goals and plans about how they're going to achieve those things. That will be another really interesting piece of qualitative data that we'll get, but it'll be really interesting for the individual staff who do that, because they will get that feedback in an anonymised form. It'll give them a report on whether or not people feel that they've been listened to. So that will be quite an eye-opener if you think that you're good at something and then you get some feedback. So I'm going to, thanks. Any other questions, Jo?
I suppose just to highlight, Barbara's kind of put in the chat about kind of really agreeing with what Jocelyn said, and I suppose through the chat there seems quite a lot of agreement around the importance, particularly of these conversations in the context of people living with long-term health conditions, and just what that communication can often feel like. So that feels something really important for us to kind of take away from here and think a little bit more about kind of perhaps where that might develop. So, you know, thank you for all of you that have kind of put that into the chat. I'll let you move on to your next question, Sandra.
Okay, I'm just going to come to the next question, and then I think we could perhaps talk about what Andrew's put there. So the next question is, if you were designing this programme, what would it include? What would you like to see in it? From the things that I've spoken about, are there things that you think we're missing? While people have a think about that, I can just see that Andrew put the point of my earlier comments is, although both smoking and finances are valid and important, most healthcare professions are only trained in the first area. Yes, absolutely. It may be necessary to refer somebody on. We can't expect us all to be experts in everything, and what we try to encourage people to do is to be knowledgeable about where to signpost people on to, where to refer on for additional help and support. And in the last couple of years, the role of the social prescriber or care coordinator has really come on. There are far more care coordinators and social prescribers now than there were 5 years ago, and they're often the go-to people to know about the other services and to help people access them. So yes, it's about listening to people's needs, but also knowing about how to refer on, rather than us trying to train everybody to be experts in everything. Michael, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for very good reasons. Absolutely. Yeah, we have to listen, don't we? So, and training on non-judgmental approaches, Shelley, I can see that. Thank you. Yes, so we do some work in terms of bias, but that's one of the things I've been thinking about, really building on that to get people to.
Oh, no, it said they were having problems with it.
It's trying to help people to really be non-judgmental and recognise biases that they might bring to a situation, and to be able to, if you recognise it, then you can deal with that. But yeah, that's really useful. Thank you. And Fiona, holding back on giving advice unless requested, and how to give advice while supporting autonomy. Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of part of motivational interviewing as well. It's about asking permission to give advice. So we should only really be giving advice when somebody's given us permission to give that advice. And you have to remember, most people in health and social care are there because they want to help people. And there is something inherent in health and social care folk that feel that they just want to help a lot of the time. And some of what we're doing is trying to sit on that natural response to fix, and to stop and listen, and to stop seeing ourselves as health and social care personnel as the experts, because we are not at all. So it goes against the grain sometimes. A lot of health and social care people want to start off by going in and sorting and solving and telling, and it goes. It takes quite a lot of effort for some staff to move away from that. I've missed the chat now, Jo, if there's anything else.
I think something particular to pick out from the chat, there's lots of fantastic ideas about things that the programme could cover and certainly could build on more. Shelley's put a point about recognising how it can leave people feeling vulnerable and the importance of following up on actions once trust has been built. If this isn't done carefully, it can leave people feeling very let down. And I think that feels like that's tapping into something really important about that communication and kind of what it can mean to communicate with someone in these kind of settings, and how that trust and that relationship builds and those dynamics to understand. So I think that feels a really, really important point, and probably something that we maybe don't have so much of in the programme currently. But yeah, lots of other really fantastic points in the chat around kind of providing information around accessing help in other fields, signposting, which absolutely critical stuff.
What we have got on the website is we have started to try and create a tab about signposting, so that there's some resources there, but it's by no means extensive, and that's something that I'd like to see improve over the next 12 months. I'm just looking at the comment that Andrew's made about training that he had on improving verbal communication skills and using video feedback. It's interesting. One of the things that's been brought to us a lot recently that I've read is that people would like to see a quality conversation in action so that they can view the skills and strategies being used and use that as a training component. So we want to try and build that into the e-learning. It might, I'm just thinking, so yes, I mean, people can use video feedback. If you were actually videoing somebody having a conversation with a patient, that would be fraught with permissions and information governance, but we could do some video training. I know that some programs do some video participants talking to each other so they can use that to feedback. At the moment, we have too much content packed into 6 hours of training. We can't pack any more into that, but there might be the opportunity when we start to do the masterclasses to do that. I don't know what you think, Jo, about that.
I think Andrew's point raises something really important for the development of the programme, and actually I guess often that loop is people can attend training, but then what is that like in terms of practice? How does that change kind of how people do things? And as Andrew points out, videoing kind of feedback, however you might do that, as in videoing yourself in a role play even, and actually observing actually what can we see from that, can be really, really valuable. And I know there are current training programmes on different topics where that still is used as a technique, and colleagues have told me how much they learnt from that. So I'd love to think about that a bit more and kind of what opportunities there are for that. Some other points to pick up from the chat. Sorry, there's so many comments. I do apologise if I'm missing things. Really important point from Carol, that communication is not always about speaking. We need to watch and pick up what is happening around us. Really, really important point to think about.
Absolutely, Carol. I think silence is really, really underrated. You have to enable silence to give somebody an opportunity to stop and think, and health and social care staff are very quick to jump into silent moments. To me, silence means somebody's thinking, and when somebody's doing their own thinking, that's far more valuable than the thinking that I'm doing. So yeah, absolutely.
But I think it perhaps also is another area that the programme could develop in further, in terms of all those cues and signs of anxiety, for example, that are very subtle, but you can sort of see it in a person if you know what you're looking for. So that again can help us kind of tailor our conversations. So really useful points to consider about developing the programme.
Lovely.
Oh, got a hand up from Lee.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, in terms of, and I look at it from I suppose my point of view. I hop across lots of different organisations, as you know, but also different areas and things. And with this programme, is this something happening in each area across the country? And are we kind of like learning between, you know, the best practice from each area? Are the conversations ongoing through that sort of stuff, or is it more of a Derbyshire initiative?
It's a Derbyshire initiative, but there are lots of similar programmes going on around the country. So I've spoken to people in Leicestershire, Rutland and Lincolnshire. There is the National Make Every Contact Count, which we have taken into account and is part of the programme, but it's kind of much more than, it's MEC plus, or MEC, you know, MEC with extra strength. And that's a national programme, and that's got lots of national evidence regarding that. But there are lots of various programmes, and this is all kind of part of personalised care. I think I can see Joe has put on a link to the Personalised Care Institute. Having better communication and better engagement with individuals means that the care that they receive is more personalised and better because of that. And there are lots of programmes around the country running out of the Personalised Care Institute. There's also a curriculum that there are standards that training should adhere to as part of the Personalised Care Institute, and we're going through that accreditation process with this programme at the moment.
Brilliant, thanks so much.
I wanted to flag a comment from Michael that seems really, really important to kind of highlight as well, in relation to developing the programme, about interviewing techniques not generally being very good, and people may often ask a question and then keep talking, which feels really, really relevant for thinking about this skill set in quite a lot of the areas that people might be using the skills. So thank you for that. Really helps to think about.
I think we've come to the end of the time, haven't we, Lee?
Yes, we have. I'm just checking for, I think, and thank you very much, Joe. You've done my job for me there today, picking up questions out of the chat box, and I think we've covered most things. I've made a couple of notes on just what we could perhaps do after the session, on to kind of circulate how to book onto the training for anyone that might not have that information. So I'll pick that up after, because we often just, you know, circulate some information round to those that registered for the event on top of the meeting link after the event. And just to remind everyone that this session has been recorded, so we'll upload it online, and along with the aforementioned, I'll circulate the link should you wish to share it. So thank you very much for coming along. Thank you very much, Mary, for interpreting. And apologies for the tech issues at the start, but it wouldn't be a virtual meeting if we didn't have a little bit of fun. And that's why I never start the recording until, you know, that won't be on the recording. So we got off with that one. Okay.
We got there eventually, didn't we?
we did. And apologies if there are any kind of wrong links sent about from our end. So thank you very much, everybody. Like I say, I'll circulate that information to all those that registered to attend today, and any kind of networking or contacts can kind of go from there. Michael, next meeting date, is that a question about the Derbyshire Dialogue? Yeah, Lenny, I don't know if you're on the call, if you're able to confirm that one today. I know it was being discussed.
We're waiting to confirm the next meeting date. We won't be having one in December, but the next one will be January. But hopefully we can get a confirmed meeting date out to you in the next few days.
Brilliant. All right. Thank you very much for that. Okay, then. Thanks so much, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording now, and have a good afternoon.